Hey there, welcome to Livewire. I'm your host, Luke Burbank. This week on the show, we are talking to the writer Jon Mooallem from the New York Times Magazine. His latest book of essays is called Serious Face, and it explains, among other things, why you might not want to text your friend a picture of a Spanish bullfighter that you saw somewhere and tell them that this person looks exactly like them. Also, how poetry can save your life if you are injured in rural Alaska. Plus, we're going to meet the chef and bar owner, Jenny Nguyen, behind the world's first sports bar that plays only women's sports on the televisions. It's called the Sports Bra, which is an amazing name. It also happens to be right here in Portland, Oregon. Then we're going to hear some music from friend of the show, the one, the only, Laura Veirs. So that is the plan. We have an amazing show in store this week. Don't go anywhere. It all gets started right after this. Listen to Grown, a new podcast from The Moth for true stories that deal with the challenges and joys of growing up. Co-hosts Elisa Cosme and Alfonso Lacayo are on the cusp of adulthood, and they're bringing you Moth stories about first crushes, culture, identity, secrets, and more. Each episode, they'll dissect these stories, talk to the storytellers themselves, and feature on-the-street interviews, audio diaries from young voices, and more. Grown is a podcast that reminds us that no matter how old we are, we're never fully grown. New episodes drop bi-weekly on Fridays beginning Wednesday, February 8th. Listen on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. Hey, Elena.
Hey, Luke. How's it going?
It is going very well. It's nice to see you. You are somewhere in America at a writing event, right?
That's right. I'm at a writer's camp in Vermont.
Are you feeling ready for this week's station location identification examination?
I really hope it's a city in Vermont.
It is not. I'm going to give you that one hint.
Okay.
This, of course, is the part of the show where I quiz Elena on a station in America where Livewire is on the radio, and you try to guess where I'm talking about. So this place is known as the toilet paper capital of the world. The company that would eventually become Quilted Northern invented the first toilet paper here that would come without the risk of splinters. So the takeaway from this is early production methods of toilet paper sometimes left wood splinters in the rolls.
Okay, well, northern, so it's somewhere in the north, and then toilet paper, there's got to be a lot of trees around, so...
Let me give you another clue. I like how you're thinking, but this might help too. The French explorer Jean Nicole originally named this spot, and apologies for my French, La Baie des Points, or the Bay of Stinking Waters, because of the smell of the algae. But they later renamed it in favor of the color of the algae.
Is it Green Bay, Wisconsin?
It is exactly Green Bay, Wisconsin, where we're on the radio on WHID radio.
Woo!
I'm really glad they changed the name.
Yeah, good rebranding there.
I have been to Green Bay, and it is a wonderful place, and I'm glad it's not called the Bay of Stinking Waters anymore. All right. Shout out to everyone listening in Green Bay. Should we get to the show, Elena?
Let's do it.
All right, take it away.
From PRX, it's... This week, writer Jon Mooallem.
He has a face that's as dreary as a third-class funeral on a rainy day. and what I realized with this bullfighter, who's my exact twin, apparently, was just renowned for his ugliness.
Chef and women's sports advocate Jenny Nguyen.
Here we are, we're a space that is dedicated to showing women's sports, right? But there isn't any possible way that we're able to show 24/7 content.
With music from Laura Veirs and our fabulous house band. I'm your announcer, Elena Passarello, and now the host of Livewire, Luke Burbank.
Hey, thank you so much, Elena Passarello. Thanks to everyone tuning in all over the country, including in Green Bay, Wisconsin. We have a great show in store for y'all this week. Of course, we asked the Livewire listeners a question for this week's show. That question was, describe your dream business. This is because one of our guests, Jenny Nguyen, kind of went out and made her dream business, this place called the Sports Bra in Portland you're going to hear about. We're going to hear those listener responses coming up. First, though, it's time for the best news we heard all week.
Best news.
course, this is our little reminder at the top of the show that there's some good news happening out there in the world. Elena, what is the best news you heard all week?
Okay, kitty cat news from Kentucky.
It's been a week since one of us checked in on the kitty cat beat, so it was high time.
I have a hard time not making all my best news feline related, but this one's pretty good. There's a woman in Ashland, Kentucky named Randy McGlone who recently got herself a new recliner. Tried it out for a couple of days, decided that it wasn't for her, called the company, and they took it back to their big Sandy Superstore warehouse. And she was like, back to the drawing board. Wait a minute, where's my cat?
Oh, no.
And she looked around, and her house isn't that big. And she has a cat that she's very close to. She calls it sort of like in the vein of an emotional support animal named Inky. Inky already had used up one of Inky's 9 lives by being in a fire when Inky was a kitten. So Inky doesn't have any whiskers and has a really interesting fur pattern and burned paws. So a real survivor cat and also a real emotional cat for Randy McGlone. So back at the warehouse at the big Sandy Superstore, they unload this recliner and all they see is this little black lightning bolt that just shoots into the bowels of the warehouse. They call Randy and they're like, I think we have your cat. She goes down there and she calls and calls and calls in this big warehouse and she can't find Inky. And she goes back again and tries to find Inky. She goes back again. And this is a warehouse. So doors are opening and closing. Things are going in and out. There are plenty of recliners to hide in.
Inky can't navigate the doorways because Inky doesn't have whiskers, which we know are like an important sensory part of the cat's deal.
That's right. But 3 weeks later, Randy thought her cat was gone. They finally managed to trap Inky at the Superstore. They called her. She came over. And now the cat is reunited.
And this woman has decided to just buy futons going forward. Just something with less
pillows on the floor. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like a tatami room. Something where the cat cannot get wedged in a hidden space.
If they want to hide certain kinds of cats, you really can never find them. They're so flexible and like, good luck.
Speaking of hidden animals, can I just tell you about the best thing that I saw this week or heard about? I didn't actually see it, but I heard about a chinchilla named Mr. Bean, who was hiding in the bag of somebody that I was flying with. I was flying home from Chicago recently, and we had no end of like weather delays and hassle, and everyone on the flight kind of bonded because we had, been through so much planes, trainsing, and automobilesing.
Right.
And the person next to me, she mentioned that she goes, I'm sneaking an animal on this flight. I go, what? She goes, yeah, I have a chinchilla named Mr. Bean in the bag. She showed me some pictures of him on her phone, and she was like, he's my son. He's my everything. I was like, where do you get a chinchilla named Mr. Bean? She goes, well, I'm a teacher in Chicago, and he was the class chinchilla.
Oh. She went through security, like surreptitiously?
We were way past security. We were at the gate.
Oh, my gosh.
And Mr. Bean had made it through security and was ready to take this flight from Chicago to Portland. And the idea that this teacher had basically taken Mr. Bean home because, that happens with those classroom pets where it's kind of like, there are no takers. I think he was like 8 or 9 when she took him home. So it was not a young chinchilla. And they have now bonded so well and to such a degree that they're just like little ride or die for each other. So,
oh my gosh.
And Mr. Bean made it to Portland safe and sound. So I'm not advocating for sneaking pets onto flights, but I'm just saying it was pretty memorable and cool for me plus I didn't know how cute chinchillas are. I think of a chinchilla as being sort of hamster-like. They got these big old cute ears. They got very eyes. Kind of, their eyes, big giant eyes. They're like a Disney character or something.
Did you see that JetBlue photo of a flight attendant just carrying a gigantic cat up and down the aisles going, is this your cat? Is this your cat?
That would happen if I tried to sneak my cat Bubbles onto a flight. She would escape within moments and be giving Inky a run for their money in terms of using up lives. So, Inky the cat only being on life number 7 and Mr. Bean the chinchilla flying across the country. That's the best news that we've heard all week. All right, let's get our first guest on over to the show. He is a writer at large for the New York Times Magazine, and he was the person behind the surprisingly listenable podcast, The Walking Podcast, wherein he would just record himself walking around Bainbridge Island in Washington, where he lives. What we want to talk to him about, though, is his exceptional new book of essays. It's titled Serious Face. It covers everything from monk seals to the former skydiving entrepreneur who's been building his dream city in the desert of California, calling it the center of the world. Jon Mooallem joined us on stage at the Alberta Rose Theater. Let's take a listen to that conversation. Hello, Jon.
Hi.
Welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much.
This book, Serious Face, is just such an absolutely wonderful read. It's a collection of essays on a variety of different topics and things that you've reported on in your life over the years. One of the questions that you pose in the book is, why are we not better than we are? You said that's sort of a question that you've been trying to answer in one way or another throughout your career. What do you exactly mean by that question, why are we not better than we are? What are you trying to explore?
Yeah, well, first I'll say, so I kind of borrowed, well, I didn't borrow it, I stole that line from a from a poem by a poet named Eric Trethewey, which I'd read like 25 years ago and just kind of still is rattling around my head. And yeah, I think that's when I had to sit down and think about, what tied a lot of these pieces together. It did seem like that was a question they were all driving at in one way or another. Not necessarily like in a moral sense, like why are we not, perfect angels all the time, but just even like as functional machinery, like why is it that I was supposed to check that my water heater wasn't leaking before I left the house this morning and I didn't do it, and why?
Did that really happen to you today?
That's a true story. But yeah, I just think that we're, in some ways, it's like when you really can step back, you see, like a lot of us are kind of bumbling around and more inept than I think we generally realize. And that, but the problem is like we can imagine better ways of doing things. We can imagine sort of the perfect way to do everything. And so a lot of the stories in the book are about this kind of breakdown between theory and practice when people are really trying to accomplish something great and kind of just can't get there.
One of the early essays in the book involves you and some buddies heading out to Alaska for a kayaking trip. And things did not sort of play out the way you were expecting. What happened?
Yeah, we were kayaking in Glacier Bay, which is a really remote part of Alaska, and had been rained in one day. Weren't able to get in the boats that day because the water was too rough, so we decided to just kind of hike around after the rain had died down. And a very large tree fell over and landed on my friend and knocked him into a river. That's the short version of the story.
But I mean, what makes it so compelling is, first of all, your friend was, it turns out, injured very sort of gravely, and you're also in the absolute middle of nowhere. Mm-hmm. And also, like, no offense, but one of your friends was sort of an outdoor guide, but the other two...
Exactly. My friend, whose name is also John, was the one who was injured, and he was the one who had all the experience and know-how. We were his guests. I mean, I should say he's okay. We got him out. Yeah. And the Coast Guard came through a kind of freak series of coincidences. We were able to get word to the Coast Guard. But yeah, I mean, that's a perfect example of this question. Is like, somehow everything worked out, but it was not because we were perfectly capable, competent people. It was a lot of luck. It could have easily gone different ways, and it was just sort of like repeatedly kind of just like trying to not let the current emergency, take us all under, and then getting to the next emergency. You
turned, as is so often the case in emergencies, to poetry?
Yeah.
Yes.
First aid kit was poetry.
Absolutely. You really want me in a crisis because, there was a moment in this whole adventure where my one friend had gone back to our campsite to try to get a hold of this radio and reach some help, and I was left alone with my friend John, who was just laying on the forest floor, completely immobilized. And, I had this sense, like probably mostly from movies, you're supposed to talk to the person who's kind of going in and out of consciousness and just kind of try to pull them back. But, I didn't have a script for that, right? Like, you actually need to say things. And I initially started kind of like bumbling around. And at one point I apologized because I thought I'd overstayed my welcome with his family at Christmas one year. I was sort of like cleansing myself of my, and I realized, this is messed up. Like, I don't want him to think I think he's dying, right? So
And that's also not how that's supposed to work. It's the person who's dying who's supposed to get some stuff off their chest, not the other person who's basically fine.
You know, that's a really good point. I'm going to add that to the list of things that did not go right that day. But yeah, so I had these professors in college who had insisted and required us to memorize poems. And the first one I reached for was The Shampoo by Elizabeth Bishop, which is a love poem she wrote for another woman about washing her hair. And so there I was reciting that to Jon. And you know, I went through some more hits, some Robert Frost, some Auden, and I didn't realize at the time I would not have been able to tell you it was that long. I thought it was maybe a matter of minutes. It turns out for an hour and a half, Jon and I were there before anyone came back to help us, and I think I was doing poetry most of that time.
And he told you later that actually was really great for him in that moment. It was really helpful.
Yeah, I mean that was another really surprising thing about being able to talk this out all this time later. Was I had this image of myself as pretty helpless, and I think Jon was really grateful for it. He told me that if he had to almost die on the floor of a forest, he'd love for me to be there next time too. So yeah.
This is Livewire from PRX. We are listening to a conversation with the writer Jon Mooallem about his latest collection of essays, Serious Face. We've got to take a quick break, but when we get back, Jon is going to read one of those essays about his face and its resemblance to a certain Spanish bullfighter, which Jon didn't take as a huge compliment. Don't go anywhere. More Livewire in a moment. Livewire is brought to you in part by Alaska Airlines. Alaska Airlines offers the most nonstops from the West Coast, including destinations like Hawaii, Costa Rica, and Belize. And as a member of the One World Alliance, Alaska Airlines can connect you to more than 1,000 destinations worldwide with their global partners. Learn more at alaskaair.com. Hey, welcome back to Livewire from PRX. I'm Luke Burbank here with Elena Passarello. We are at the Alberta Rose Theater here in Portland, Oregon. We're talking to Jon Mooallem. His new book of essays is Serious Face. The essay that you've written about your face and the face of a famous Spanish bullfighter was actually in the New York Times Magazine. I'm sure a lot of people here got a chance to read it. It's a really incredible piece of writing, and I was wondering, could you maybe read a little bit from that particular essay in the book?
Sure, yeah.
Now, friends of yours started sending you photographs of this particular bullfighter that they would see photos of in Spain. And what was his name?
His name was Manolete. Although I didn't know that at the time. It was two friends who had been at a restaurant and seen this photograph on the wall and sent it to me immediately because the guy looked just like me. They were really freaked out by it, as was I. I saw it too. You don't often normally see this about yourself, but I couldn't deny it. He looked exactly like me.
And then so you wrote about it, and maybe we could hear some of that.
Sure. Yeah. Well, so I'll just say that my face is very crooked for the listening public at home. My jaw is kind of going in one way, my nose in the other. I say in the piece, I'm never kind of really looking straight at you, no matter which way I tilt my head.
I think it's beguiling for the record.
Well, thank you. This is all just a trick to get people to tell me I'm handsome.
Yeah.
All right. So this is a part of the piece where I stop talking about the bullfighter's face and start talking about my face instead. No one appreciates my face with more uncontrollable gusto than dentists, though. More than once, I've endured one calling in a colleague from the other room to come have a look. They peer at my x-rays with giddy concentration, as though pressing open a fresh book of Sudoku, and sometimes ask me to get out of the chair and stand against the wall so they can get a few shots with a regular camera, too. I was in my mid-30s before I realized that these demoralizing portrait sessions weren't a standard part of a dental exam. Every time I see a new dentist, it's the same. They get like archaeologists before a dig, eager to know what sort of ruined structure is hidden under there, imagining all the physical dysfunction and pain that I must be living with, and the many diagnostic tools and specialists that could be gathered behind the project of setting it all right. They aren't wrong. My jaw is so misshapen that I can feel it wriggle out of joint whenever I open wide enough for a hamburger or a yawn, and then bonk back into place. And the gums on the left side of my mouth are wearing away at a distressing rate, since those teeth apparently clamp together long before the ones on the other side can connect, and therefore do most of the chewing. But my only serious complaint has been the headaches, a small genus of pains that have racked me periodically since childhood. There's a particular kind of dull headache that sprouts under and above my eyes like mold. There's one that presses and holds its weight against my face from inside, like a tantruming toddler squatting against her bedroom door to keep the world out. There's the throbbing one that hangs around diffusely for hours and only produces pain when I focus on it, like a pang of guilt. Maybe none of this makes sense. These headaches molder at the periphery of language in a nonsensical cloud of synesthesia and memories, purple pain, newsprint-colored pain, pain that has the turgid heft of Greek yogurt or smells like the inside of an umbrella, pain that funnels me back to one gloomy Sunday afternoon from my childhood, splayed on the carpet, watching Steve Martin in The Jerk on Channel 11. Does anyone truly comprehend the pressures roiling inside their own head? As far as I understand it, the source of my headaches is probably my sinuses, which over time were narrowed and crushed like a plastic straw as the bones of my jaw and nose grew into them, out of alignment. But I can't say for sure. At a couple of different points in my life, I've gotten motivated to better diagnose and even fix these problems, shuttling around for exploratory scans and consultations. Doctors have proposed plastic surgery to straighten out my nose, or surgically breaking my jaw and resetting it. After walking me through the complete cartography of the human face in an anatomy textbook, one postulated that perhaps my flattened sinuses could be bored open wider with lasers. I actually didn't even know that's a real thing. When he said it to me, I didn't know until the other day that that's a real thing.
Really?
Yeah. I thought he was just, I was like, well, what's with this guy? Anyway. But to be honest, I've never earnestly considered pursuing any of these doctors' recommendations, just nodded along inertly with my misshapen face as they spoke. Somehow, every intervention has felt so pointlessly ambitious, so laborious, so dramatic. For better or worse, these problems feel normal to me. And the truth is, I started to identify so deeply with the peculiarities of my face that the idea of correcting those imperfections eventually became unthinkable. Looking in the mirror, I try to imagine every part of me pointing flawlessly forward and wonder, who would I be then? When I was younger, I worried I was ugly, but by the time I turned 30, there was even a measure of perverse vanity involved. I'd come to appreciate my face so much that I was willing to live with the pain of having it attached to my head. And that's why, reading the first Manolete biography on my kitchen floor the night it arrived, it didn't upset me to learn how allegedly grotesque my doppelganger was, and how unrepentantly and universally this face we shared was ridiculed. I was able to brush it off, and even wrest some wry amusement from the discovery. And that felt good. Good to feel unthreatened. Good to recognize that a kind of genuine acceptance and equanimity had apparently been growing inside me from an odd angle all those years. In short, that night, I felt myself freely loving who I am and was proud. But then I read the rest of the Manolete biography.
It's Jon Mooallem here on Livewire. The story of Manolete and his life is fascinating, as detailed in this book. Also, you point out that science right now is that really our sinuses serve no functional purpose other than ruining our lives.
Yeah.
If we have sinus problems.
Yeah, I got really curious about sinuses. Like, what are these things? Why do we have essentially these empty spaces in our heads? And yeah, as it was explained to me, it's this sort of case of not everything in evolution does a job, right? Some things just happen, and then they're not hurting anyone. They kind of stick around. And so we've got these things in our head just clogging up with snot all the time, and there's nothing we can do about it.
That's what I think is so cool about this book, though, is because it seems like you got the photos of Manolete years and years ago, but the essay itself takes us to all of these different places. Like, I don't know, I'm assuming you didn't think you were going to be spending this much time in the, I can't say the annals of sinus studies, maybe the sinuses of sinus studies.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, the first thing was I got this photo. I mean, I think it was almost 15 years ago now, and I got this photo, and I just had this photo on my phone, and I'd show it to people, and I'd be like, check this out, and everyone would laugh. And it took me years before I even thought, like, well, who is this guy? Maybe I should figure out who this guy is. And so, yeah, I say in the book, I finally got this biography of him, and it arrives, and I rip it open. I'm sitting on my floor, And the first sentence I read, literally, I open up the book, I crack the spine, and I look, and the first sentence I read, it says, "He has a face that's as dreary as a third-class funeral on a rainy day." And what I realized with this bullfighter, who's my exact twin, apparently, was just renowned for his ugliness. Like, people just could not stop talking about how ugly he was. Even people who really loved him, they would always tack on some cheap shot about, call him Old Big Nose or something. So yeah, then I had to sit with that for a few years.
Yeah.
And then I was like, well, how can I write about sinuses? No, I'm kidding.
Right.
But yeah, no, you're right. I think like in many ways, it's like, even though I think having done this kind of work for so long, I kind of go through the world like thinking that everything is potentially a story. Mm-hmm. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a story like right then and there. There's a lot of stuff sloshing around that kind of has to wait for the right moment.
I'm wondering how it feels to you to have the reaction that this piece has had. Lots of people have been talking about it, not the least of them. Jamie Lee Curtis apparently is now your new PR person. What is going on? What is happening with you and Jamie Lee Curtis?
JLC. I got a really nice note from Jamie Lee Curtis, and it's fun when she's celebrities,
But now,
but yeah, so she's been kind of championing the book online, which I'm very grateful for, and I don't know what more to say, but thank you, Jamie Lee Curtis.
Yeah.
I guess the nature of my question is, you have written a lot of really incredible essays, but they're often about other people. A guy who decides to build a town that he's calling the center of the universe in Felicity, California, named for his wife. When you write a piece like that and people say, hey, that was a great piece, that feels good. But when you write a piece that's literally about the inside of who you are and they say, this really moved me, that must be an intense experience.
Yeah, it's really special. I mean, I think it's like, I don't really understand how to interact. I mean, it's nice when I get an email. Like, I've gotten some really beautiful emails from people, and that's always great. And yet I know better than to kind of go actively seek the feedback to the piece online.
When I finally saw Manoletti's picture, I thought he was a quite handsome, kind of got a little Vincent Gallo type situation going, which, as your twin, by extension, means you're also a handsome person, Jon Mooallem.
Yeah, well, thank you.
And more importantly, my phone and computer autocorrect many words now to Mooallem.
Same. What?
So I don't know how you did that. That's the mark of success.
That's Jamie Lee Curtis.
That's the JLC book.
Yeah, that's the JLC
100%.
difference. Yeah, right there.
Jon Mooallem, everyone. The book is Serious Face. That was Jon Mooallem right here on Livewire, recorded at the Alberta Rose Theatre. His latest book, Serious Face, is available now. Hey, special thanks this episode to Christian Asher. Christian is part of the Livewire member community. Doesn't just share my middle name, although that is important. Christian's also, maybe even more importantly, generously supporting our show with a donation each month. And we're super thankful for that because it's how we are able to keep doing Livewire week in and week out. So thanks, Christian, for keeping the show going. This is Livewire. As we do each week on the show, we have asked the Livewire listeners a question. This week, in honor of Jenny Nguyen, who we're going to talk to about starting her dream business, the sports bra, we asked the listeners, describe your dream business. Elena has been collecting up those responses. I see you're already laughing. What are the people saying?
3 words from Mark in terms of Mark's dream business. Hot tub testing.
Hot tub testing.
I mean, let's think this through, Mark. What do you go to people's houses and get in their hot tubs? Is that what we're talking about? Or are you in a quality control warehouse?
Right. And then the other problem is that, sure, if you're in the Goldilocks zone, that's great if you only get to test hot tubs that are the right temperature. But, they also have to figure out what's too cold and what's too hot.
Yeah.
All right. What's another dream business that one of our listeners would like to start?
Oh, this is a pretty good idea from Erica. Erica says, I want to start a business where people upload pictures and stats on their dogs. And then when I feel like having a companion on my nature walk, I will select and borrow their dog for the afternoon.
That is a great idea.
Right? You could be like, oh, I really need a long walk, pick a Rhodesian Ridgeback. If you just kind of want to take a small stroll, maybe a Cavalier King Charles, or, I don't know.
Right. As a dog owner throughout my life, of course, I loved walking my dog, but there are also the days when you just don't have time for it. Maybe you're not feeling well, you're too busy, and it would be a huge favor if somebody wanted to take your dog, run them through the woods for 10 miles, and bring them back all tired and content.
I've told you about the dog bus that used to go around Corvallis and pick up dogs and take them to the woods and exhaust them and then bring them home. And the dogs would jump on the school bus and they all knew their assigned seats.
That is adorable. But that's a business. This sounds more like a volunteer organization. Somebody who wants to walk a dog and somebody who has a dog that needs walking.
It's like a dating service.
Yeah, exactly. It's like Hinge, but for pet owners. All right, one more dream business idea from our listeners.
Okay, here's one from Maggie. Maggie wants to open a soup restaurant with rotating daily soups and a ton of side options. Garlic bread, salads, and fries. It sort of sounds like the soup counter from Seinfeld, only people are nice and maybe you can sit down.
I'll tell you what, I eat a lot of soup, even in the summertime, and I don't think there are enough dedicated soup restaurants.
Yeah.
If Maggie was able to start this business, I would be the first customer.
What do you call it? Superstars?
Super bad at coming up with restaurant names. That would be my contribution to it. I always wanted to start a restaurant that would also, you could eat in a recliner, and then when you were done, you could recline and take a nap.
The immediate nap that follows.
Yeah.
And you just
like,
peace
I just
out.
need like 10, 15 minutes to sleep this off, then I'm ready to go. No, I will not leave this Denny's. I am napping. All right, thank you to everyone who wrote in with responses to our listener question. We've got an audience question for next week's show, which we're going to reveal at the end of today's program, so stick around for that. Speaking of dream businesses, by the way, our next guest had the courage to completely defy her parents' advice during the pandemic when they said, do not open a sports bar in Portland, Oregon in the midst of a pandemic. But this was not just any sports bar. This was the Sports Bra, the world's first sports bar that we know of anyway, that exclusively shows women's sports on the televisions. It's already been a huge success. They raised over $100,000 on Kickstarter to get it going, and they've gotten all kinds of news coverage from all over the world, and in the process, they've been able to draw attention to the gender inequality in terms of which sports are getting televised. Her name is Jenny Nguyen, and she joined us on stage at the Alberta Rose Theatre. Take a listen to this. Jenny, thank you for making some time in your schedule to be here. I live not far from the Sports Bra, and I drive down Broadway every day, and there is a line out the door, and I just think, this has been too successful. You might need to shut it down. It seems like a lot of work. I mean, that place is a hit.
Yeah, it's been pretty incredible. I'm overwhelmed, really.
Let's kind of go back to, for the 4 people in America who haven't heard the story yet, of the Sports Bra. It's an amazing one. So you and some friends and your partner were out watching an NCAA finals game in the women's bracket, and it was a great game. It came down to the wire, but there was one thing going on, and your experience was that the audio wasn't on in the bar because this was women's sports.
Right, that's correct. Yeah, so, I mean, I think it's a really common experience for anyone who's a women's sports fan that goes out to go try to watch it on TV. And it's like, okay, you go to this space and there's a million TVs on, none of them have your game on. So it was the same in this particular case. And when you think about the NCAA finals, like to me, I mean, basketball's my jam.
Yes.
So it's like the biggest game of the year. And so we roll in, and there's like a dozen of us, and the game's not on. Something else is on the main screen. And so we just asked to have one of the TVs changed, and they kind of put us over into the side. And it's like a small TV in the corner, and we, are kind of used to that. So we watch the game, we have a great time, and it ends up being like one of the best games ever. And afterwards, we're just out in the parking lot milling around talking about how great a game it was. And then somebody was just like, yeah, it would have been better if the sound had been on.
Yeah. Right.
And it was at that moment where it just clicked, where I was like, I didn't even notice. So had I gotten so used to, watching women's sports in like a compromised way.
Yeah.
And that's what stood out to me.
So then you and your friends started referring to this mythical sports bar that you were going to start someday that was like where none of the lame sort of like, sexist, gendered norms of the regular sports bar existed, right?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't so blatant as that. It was as more of a place for us to just go and hang out and watch games and feel comfortable, for my friends and I. And it was never going to be a place that I was planning on opening up. It was just like this fictional place that was just like, oh, like this game would be on at the sports bra, or at the sports bra we'd have a vegan version of this, like just random stuff.
Yeah, it was this like idealized version where everything was great.
Yeah, the toilet paper would never run out.
And it sounds like you named it early. It was the sports bra, even when it was still just a figment of your imagination.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that like maybe a day or 2 days after that 2018 game, it was just like the little seed was living in my head, and I was like, if there was a place, what would it be called? What would be cool? And, the thing that kind of stuck out to me was that it's just a sports bar, and all you're doing is you're changing the channel, which is real simple, right? Mm-hmm. So you just take like sports bar and you just change the letters and
sports bra.
Yeah.
Right? You do have that trademarked, right?
I do, yeah.
Okay, good, because that is a $1 billion idea. The other thing, too, actually, Jenny, that I've heard you say before is the sports bra is not a quote-unquote women's sports bar. It's a sports bar that happens to show women's sports on the television. Why is that an important distinction to you?
Oh, man, I get it all the time. Are men allowed in there? And it's just like, it's not a sports bar for women. Yeah. It's a bar for women's sports. And so, like, statistically, a majority of women's sports fans are men. So the thing is, if you like sports, you don't care who's playing it. You just like sports. Yeah. But what happens is that, 96% of all sports that are on TV are men's sports. So that's what people identify with, and that's what they are cheering for most of the time.
But, something that I didn't realize until I started looking into the story was that there are lots and lots and lots of women's sports happening all the time. The issue is they're not being televised or they're streaming somewhere. So it seems like a big part of your work, along with creating the menu and the cocktail list and all the normal things about running a bar restaurant.
Sure.
In addition to that, you've become this sort of like content merchant who's trying to actually get the stuff to put on those TVs, right? What has that been like?
Absolutely. I really, if there's anybody out there that is into that, I really think that is somebody else's full-time job, is to find women's content so that we can play it at the bra. It's really intense, because one interesting thing is that there are, dozens and dozens of streaming services. And they know that there are people out there who are interested in these women's sports, and they want to access it. And so they're willing to pay, $4.99 a month or whatever it is. But there's so many. So even you have something as huge as the WNBA, and it's playing on 7 different channels. I mean, that's a huge league. And then you're talking about things like bowling or surfing or any of these smaller, lesser known sports or whatever. Mm-hmm. How are you going to watch those?
So is it that they're not even being filmed right now and you're trying to get people to get out to do that? Or it's they're being filmed but you don't have the rights as a bar owner to show the stream? What are the impediments?
The second thing.
Okay.
So with streaming services, they pay very little money to get that content. And that's why, it's $4.99 for me to watch it at home. Mm-hmm. But there's no way for a business to show it in commercial because those rights cost a lot more. But what has happened is people who have heard, or the streaming services who have heard, have reached out and they're like, we can see the benefit in giving you access to this stuff because it helps us to promote ourselves and to promote these leagues and these sports, and you're drawing attention to that. And so you're helping to grow it. And so it's like a, scratch your back, scratch my back kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that's what we need, I think, to get it started. Yeah.
We are talking to Jenny Nguyen, the owner and founder of the Sports Bra here in Portland, which is a sports bar that exclusively shows women's sports on the televisions. Now, when you and I talked, a month ago or so, when you were opening the place, you said that during the times of day when maybe there wasn't any content involving women's sports, you were considering leaving the TVs off as a way of pointing out this kind of lack of coverage. Where have you landed on that now that you've been open a month? What are you doing?
Yeah, part of it is kind of tempering expectations. A lot of people expect They walk into a sports bar and TVs are blaring 24/7, and that's the expectation. And so, what I wanted to do was just to make sure that people know that here we are, we're a space that is dedicated to showing women's sports, right? But there isn't any possible way that we're able to show 24/7 content. There's not running commentary. There's not tons of replays. There's not the 1976 Arnold Palmer, classic
For
special
men's
or
sports,
whatever.
there's just so much of it has been televised. It's a mind-numbing amount of content that you could
Exactly.
always put in a VHS tape of Dorf on golf.
Or somebody's always
I
talking
don't know
about something.
why that's where my brain went. That's Tim Conway doing a sketch that's not even real sports.
Yeah, I mean, with men's sports, there's always commentary. I wanted to temper expectations. I didn't want guests to come in and expect what they're used to for a regular sports bar to be what we have access to. And then another thing is 95% of all sports bars are probably streaming things that they shouldn't be. And we can do that, but we're one entity that maybe a lot of people are watching, and
Right.
two,
Super visible.
visible. And two, why would I want to do that when the point is to kind of drive home the idea that we need more representation, we need more access, we need more of
If you're
women's
stealing
sports.
the broadcast of a
Right.
women's sport, that's not
Yeah, and
helping
then,
the
and then
overall
people would come
cause.
in and be like, "Oh, there's plenty of women's sports on
Right.
TV."
Right.
So
This has been such a success, and also just something that the community has really rallied around.
Mm-hmm.
Has that sunk into you, or are you just thinking about it intellectually but not able to fully wrap your mind around it, I guess?
I think it comes in waves. There are moments, and it's the small moments that sneak in when you least expect it. Whether it's 10:30 and things are starting to die down, and I'm having my shift drink, and I sit back and I watch the bartenders do what they do. I watch my servers do what they do, and everybody is moving in the pieces that they should be. There's people sitting at the bar watching a game. And those quiet moments where I'm able to sit back and be like, this is a space that I've always wanted. This is the space that I've always wanted to be in. And now that we're here, I can kind of create that for other people. And it sinks in these little moments. And then, there's messages and letters that I get daily that are very impactful. And it's a great way to slow down and remind me of why I started to do this.
The real question is, has this completely killed your ability to play rec basketball?
100%.
Which ironically was a huge part of your life before this.
Absolutely.
And now you created this
Yeah.
thing that makes it so you can't play basketball with your friends anymore.
100%. So I signed up for a rec league right before I knew I was going to open. I was just like, okay, I'm going to commit to 1 hour a week. It'll be good for me to get physically out there and sweat it out while all of this other stuff is happening. And immediately, as soon as the doors open, I was just like, you guys got to find another point guard.
Well, we're glad your talents are being used over at the Sports Bra. Jenny Nguyen, founder of the Sports Bra right here in Portland, Oregon. That was Jenny Nguyen, recorded in front of a live audience at the Alberta Rose Theater. If you're in the Portland area, make sure you check out the Sports Bra and tell Jenny hi from Livewire. I'm Luke Burbank, here with Elena Passarello. We've got to take a quick break, but don't go anywhere. When we come back, we are going to talk to Laura Veirs about what it was like producing her own music after divorcing her husband, who was also her producer. Then we're going to get to hear some of that music. So stick around. This is Livewire. Welcome back to Livewire from PRX. I'm Luke Burbank, here with Elena Passarello. All right, before we hear from our musical guest, a little preview of next week's show. We are going to be talking to essayist and New York Times bestselling author Adam Gopnik about his latest book, The Real Work, on the mystery of mastery. It explores the fundamental question of how do we learn and master a new skill, but in classic Adam Gopnik style. It does it in a way that just illuminates the wider world somehow. Booklist calls it joyous and insightful. We're also going to hear how Adam ended up, I would say, basically dominating the first 15 minutes of the Oscar-nominated film Tar.
Yes.
It was I really think of it as an Adam Gopnik film at this point. We're also going to hear some comedy from the very funny Abby Govindan, who attempted to scam the KKK for a school project. And as always, we're going to be looking to get your answer to our listener question. Elena, what are we asking the listeners for next week's show?
We want to know, what are you the master of? So what skill do you have in spades?
Right. Or just a thing that you are the most of. It may not be, it could be mastery, or it could just be,
Extraness.
Right? That would be, although I think I may have that title. I'm not sure. Anyway, if you've got a response to our question, hit us up on Twitter or Facebook. We're at Livewire Radio, pretty much everywhere out there on social media. All right, our musical guest this week is a singer-songwriter known for her inquisitive and literary lyrics. She's released a dozen albums, many of them via her own label, Raving Marching Band Records. She's also collaborated with a whole range of artists, including Sufjan Stevens, Nico Case, and also K.D. Lang as part of the supergroup Case Lang Veirs. Her new album is Found Light. Laura Veirs joined us on stage at the Holt Center for the Performing Arts in Eugene, Oregon. Let's take a listen to that.
Hi, Luke.
Laura, it's so nice to have you back on the show.
Thanks for having me.
How have you been?
I've been all right. How have you been?
We've been all right. I was reading a quote from you about this latest album. I mean, you have made a lot of records in your day, and you said that this album in many ways kind of feels like your debut album. Why so?
This is the first one that I have produced myself, and I produced it with a friend named Shahzad Ismaili from New York. And my ex-husband was my producer for 20 years, and so when we broke up, I had to rediscover myself as a musician independently, and it took a little bit of searching, but I'm happy with what I found.
Wow. So that's a whole new way of making your music.
Yeah.
Did you, I don't want to get you to talk about anything that you don't feel particularly comfortable with, but did you find as your own producer or co-producer that you made different decisions and that you liked some of the decisions better because now you were sort of driving that bus?
Yeah, in certain ways. I mean, Tucker, my ex, is a great record producer, and we made a lot of music that I'm proud of. But being in my own producer driver's seat, I made some decisions that I felt happy with, like only doing a couple takes and not really doing a lot of edits, just going with the raw feeling of the music, and also limiting ourselves to just a few instruments per track so that the songs themselves really came to life in a way that I felt was fresh and new for me. So yeah, it was a really difficult experience in terms of figuring out how to parse out myself, from my ex and that long relationship, which was really collaborative for so many years. Also, we have kids and houses and studios and all this stuff that we had to disentangle over a long period of time. And then I wanted to be really authentic in the way that I told the story of how difficult this is, because especially when you have kids, a divorce is very painful. But also the reason people do it is because it's leading you to something better. So I did want to try in my most authentic way as a writer, a songwriter, to express the depth of that situation.
Well, it would appear that the music is really finding an audience. The New York Times' What to Cook This Week newsletter instructed its readers to listen to your new single while they're cooking this weekend. This is a real thing. Do you know about this?
Someone mentioned it backstage. I had heard that it was recommended on the New York Times playlist, but I didn't realize it was a specific cooking
it's
playlist.
What to Cook This Week. People are supposed to listen to the new single and, according to the New York Times, cook cheese enchiladas.
Okay, well, I should try that. Sounds fun.
Is that the song that we're going to hear?
That's not one. That's
Okay.
pretty hard rocker.
Okay.
But it's called Winter Windows, and it's out on YouTube. I did a video. I self-made a video in my basement with my iPhone, and was doing a weird, insane dancing. So it's on YouTube. You can check it out.
This is Laura Veirs here on Livewire.
This is one of the songs off my new album. It's called My Lantern. Diamond eyes burning bright in the sun in the park. You are Wonderful you are, my lantern in the dark. Feet on the street, fist in the sky, I watch your poetry arc. You give me hope, you are my lantern in the dark, my lantern, my lantern. As night stitches night with 1,000 question marks, you bring me peace, you are my lantern in the dark, and the whole world's blue, roving like a dead-eyed shark, restless as the sea. You are my lantern in the dark, my lantern, my diamond eyes burning bright in the sun in the park. You are wonderful, you are my lantern in the dark, my lantern, my lantern. Thank you.
That was Laura Veirs right here on Livewire. Her latest album, Found Light, is out now. All right, that's going to do it for this week's episode of the show. A huge thanks to our guests, Jon Mooallem, Jenny Nguyen, and Laura Veirs. Livewire is brought to you in part by Alaska Airlines.
Laura Haddon is our executive producer. Heather D. Michelle is our executive director. Our producer and editor is Melanie Sevchenko. Our assistant editor is Trey Hester. Our marketing manager is Paige Thomas. And our production fellow is Tanvi Kumar. Yasmin Median is our intern. Our house band is Ethan Fox Tucker, Sam Tucker, A.L. Alves, and A. Walker Spring, who also composes our music. Molly Pettit is our technical director and mixer, and our house sound is by D. Neil Blake.
Additional funding provided by the Oregon Arts Commission, a state agency funded by the state of Oregon and the National Endowment for the Arts. Livewire was created by Robin Tenenbaum and Kate Sokoloff. This week, we'd like to thank member Christian Asher. For more information about the show or how you can listen to our podcast, head on over to livewireradio.org. I'm Luke Burbank for Elena Passarello and the whole Livewire team. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next week. Dear Livewire, when we first met, I was really shy. I had no idea we'd spend so much time together or that you'd be one to fill my heart with joy and make me want to be a better person. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know you were here. I was busy reading a review from one of our many rapturously smitten listeners. Oh, wait, actually, no, sorry. This is from Elena. Anyway, the point is, it would be really helpful if you wanted to leave us a review. Feel free to say really nice things about us, and we'll even read them now and then on the show. So you might hear your review of Livewire read on the program itself. Reviews help other people hear about the show, and then we can keep doing this for a long, long time because we love having this job. Thank you so much if you've left a review, and if you're about to leave a review, you can go ahead and do it right where you get the podcast.
From PRX.